Hello, math fans. I'm Dr. Andy Lovelace from the University of Washington, taking a little break from making review videos for my students to do a little bit of informal research on the history of mathematical symbols. I actually was going to make a video about a bunch of puns, but I thought first maybe I should make something more real, and maybe that will follow. I just was looking through several resources, which I'm going to go through in a second. And here's a few things I found. So around the 1500s is some of the earliest recorded use of the symbol plus. It's a shortened version of the Latin et, which means and. So these symbols haven't been around forever. Now there might be examples of symbols like this being used before that, but that's 1500. In my view of history, I guess as I get older, I don't think that's so incredibly long ago. Minus was then recorded somewhat later. Interestingly, what I read was that the time symbol was a replacement for the dot. Originally, they used the dot, so that's kind of interesting. The equal symbol was intentionally designed by this person, Robert Record, which I'll pull up a little bit later after the plus. But he was, I guess, quoted at saying nothing could be more equal, had these two parallel lines. Most of this I didn't know. I've been teaching math for 20 years, so I felt bad that I hadn't actually looked this up. The Obelus, which is the name of this, is really someone trying to summarize what we mean by a fraction in an abbreviated form. So I think the dots indicate the numbers that would be there. And it has a name. It's called the Obelus. The Obelus also, that name refers to like some sort of correction within writing. So it's some sort of character used in printing to indicate either an error or a cross-reference or a footnote. But it was first used by this Johann Rahn. And I'm going to pull up some of the places I found the history. I'm not claiming to be a perfect historian. I'm using a couple different sources. And after I just kind of summarize some of the things I found, I'll go through and look at that and point you there. The square root symbol without the bar on top is called the radix. I guess that's been used for a long time. And radix is Latin for root. So it's been called a root for a long time. John Wallis, this must be the late 1500s or 1600s, intentionally named this the infinity symbol. It has a specific name, the Lemniscate, but it comes from a word in Latin that means a ribbon, and in Greek a word that means a woolen ribbon. So maybe it sort of makes sense. And the only other things I noted just in my quick search is that René Descartes is given credit for the f of x function notation, that Euler was the first to use the sigma sign. So I guess Euler was the first sigma sign for sum, and then Leibniz stretched it out to make it an integral. But I thought I would pull up a few more things I found. I think it's kind of interesting. So first, I read through the Wikipedia article. It did have some links, which is often a good way to get you going. It referenced history of mathematics, but it appears this site says that this person, Florian Cajori, wrote a book about it. I don't have this book, so I'm making this before I've done my full research, but it appears this would be your best site if you wanted to know more, because it appears to go in more depth on each thing. But I'll use this just for a discussion here. So it says 14th century is when people started using that bar. We'll kind of go through these really quickly. The plus sign was used and the minus sign was used later. So these are all 1400s, as you can see. The square root symbol without the vinculum. Vinculum's a horizontal line used in mathematical notation. So when we put the bar over the top, it's actually separate from the original square root symbol. So that's an interesting note, that the bar across the top is the vinculum. So don't forget your vinculum. A lot of my students don't make the vinculum long enough. So I'm glad that I learned this word, vinculum. Let's add this to our repertoire. And that's this piece. So if you ever see a student that doesn't make their square root long enough, tell them to fix their vinculum. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. All right. Parentheses got used 1500s. This was interesting because, calculus is attributed to have started in the 1700s. So a lot of these symbols weren't around long before that. The dot, so the multiplication symbol, it's given a date, square root with an n, less than, greater than. So these all started to get, these are the first recorded uses. It looks like Descartes he's the one that put the vinculum on top above the radicant. Ooh. Infinity symbol, John Wallace, 1655. The Obelus variant, it says. And then it goes on. A few notes historically is that Newton used a dot for the derivative, and that still remains. A lot of physicists, that's what they prefer to use, or a double dot for the second derivative. So that still remains as a common notation. It's kind of, Newton is a little bit more attached to physics, and the school of Leibniz used this notation more. And since at the time there was a bit of debate about who actually invented calculus, kind of depending on which school of who you believe invented it, you saw one notation over the other. I think the prime is an Euler adjustment. So I think this is Newton. And there isn't, part of this, there isn't one that's right or wrong. So I think students think that math has existed forever. Really, some of these notations have not been around that long. Okay. But each has their purpose. We like a notation that leads along the way. Factorial wasn't until the 1800s, which is interesting because a lot of calculus had already been done. And so they used a different symbol for factorials before that. I believe it was some sort of, I may be writing it wrong, but like a line. I think the line was before or after. I've seen it before. That meant for factorial. It might be this. Sorry if I'm getting it wrong. No, you can't see that. All right. Several other symbols along the way. So that's interesting. If somebody wanted to learn more, there's some background. I've never really thought about this till today when I was thinking about symbols in a different way. But to me, what's interesting about that is that most of the mathematical symbols we use now have only been around for 400 or 500 years. It's not like they've been there forever. So there might be something of interest. You can read more. Wikipedia has articles about these different pieces. So there's more to be said if you're curious. All right. Thanks for listening.